Oh, hey. So, my name's Thomas, and today I'm going to be teaching you about the Lenape and the Lenape language. First of all, a good baseline to kind of get in is who are the Lenape? Where did the Lenape come from? So, the Lenape are actually a Native American group that spoke an Algonquin language that many do still live, but many they lived and many do still live on the eastern seaboard of the United States in what is now modern New Jersey-ish, northern Delaware, eastern Pennsylvania, and the western bit of New York State, New York City, the western bit of Manhattan, the island of Manhattan, that general area. Basically, this area right here, as you can see here. They lived there for a heck of a long time. So far back that even, records, there aren't even records that go back that far. Lenape have just been there for as long as we can really know with certainty. They had their own society. Lenape society actually was much more matriarchal, and sort of kinship was determined along matriarchal lines, who your mother was instead of who your father was, like in a lot of European societies and a few other native societies, unlike that. And Lenape people were just there for as long as we know, farming, hunting and gathering, warring, just having their own society, really. Of course, this all would drastically change because of one thing, basically European people from Europe. The year 1492 came and went, and European powers eventually started figuring out that there's this whole other continent that they can exploit to get a lot of economic gain from. And a lot of European powers eyed up the North American continent to kind of like see, we could probably squeeze some blood out of the stone. And so the two major European powers, not a lot of people know this, but the two major European powers that actually came into where Lenape people traditionally lived and started to set up colonies were the Swedish and the Dutch, actually. The Swedish ended up building a lot of forts and settling a lot of colonies up the Delaware River, whereas the Dutch actually settled a good few forts and little settlements around the Hudson River and what today is actually New York City, around that general area. The relationship between these colonies was kind of lukewarm at best. A lot of trade did happen between the Lenape, the Swedish, and the Dutch, and there were some friendly relations on occasion, but there was also a lot of conflict between the Lenape and the Europeans that actually came into their lands because, of course, Europeans had different ideas of who owned what and the property that you could own. And there were just a lot of disputes between Europeans and Lenape people. They would get into conflicts routinely, especially the Lenape and the Dutch had huge issues, and there was even a war that the Lenape ended up fighting against the Dutch for a while because it was just messy. Europeans were encroaching on Lenape land, taking Lenape land, barring Lenape from returning to their land or being really able to live off the land that they'd previously been able to live off, and there was just huge issues. But the thing about it is that these colonies weren't really able to dominate the Lenape per se, whereas the British, who came later and who ended up conquering the entire area, whether it be European or Lenape, British colonization was just much more different, because the thing with these prior colonies is that they had been more so trading hubs that eventually that sent a bunch of settlers over a little bit just to kind of trade with the Lenape, to kind of gain resources from the native peoples of North America, more so. whereas the British were very much more about developing their colonies and their colonial domains by sending settlers over there in droves to just take up as much land as possible to develop such an economy, so much of an economy, to just do development that sort of way. Of course, the main issue with this is that there are already people living where the British sent all of their colonists, and land conflicts between Lenape and the Lenape and the British colonists ended up just exploding more and more as they butt heads more and more. British colonists would take much, much more Lenape land, and it was just a general mess. And then huge mess. And eventually, many Lenape were just like, okay, I'm sick and tired of this. The British colonists are killing us. They're taking our land. They're barring us from being able to live on where we have lived for generations. We're done. And so many Lenape actually moved further out west into the Ohio River Valley, modern day Ohio-ish. What a coincidence. But many moved out there to kind of continue on with their own societies, and it was more so of a greener pastures thing, less European colonists mucking around, messing up things, or getting into conflict with natives. Many Lenape a good bit of the Lenape did stay behind in their traditional homeland, and many of this group of Lenape who stayed behind actually did kind of assimilate more into British, like Anglo-American culture by becoming more farmers, owning their own property, converting to Christianity, especially like the Anglo-American types of Christianity. And a lot of their descendants to this day still live in Delaware and New Jersey. You can find them all over the place, or at least in a good few places. But many more Lenape did decide to make the move out west. And history is history, and many settlers and colonists ended up kind of following the Lenape out west to take even more land to just take for themselves, to be able to squeeze value out of. And so Lenape history is especially full of this kind of vicious cycle where Lenape would be forced to move out west because of European or descendants of European colonists who were following them out west to take more of their land. And then as soon as the Lenape got settled in one area, then more European colonists would go out west, or later American colonists would go out west and take all of their land, get into battles with them, kill them, and then force the Lenape farther out west. And even not necessarily considering all the colonists who ended up forcing a lot of these migrations, the American government, as soon as America became a thing, also got involved in pushing the Lenape farther out west, farther out west, onto reservation land that they would then take and give the Lenape other reservation land. And so because of all these forced migrations and wars and conflicts with European and American colonists, the Lenape are spread all over North America, because all these relocations and everything. Many Lenape actually live in the modern day state of Oklahoma, especially the Delaware Nation and the Delaware tribe of Indians, both of which operate in and around the state of Oklahoma. But many more, as I mentioned, many stayed behind in New Jersey and Delaware in their traditional homelands. Many also ended up moving out west, more in a northwestern direction, either into Wisconsin, where the Stockbridge, Muncie community is actually located, or even into Canada to kind of escape American encroachment, American white colonists moving west and taking their land, white American colonists. especially into the Canadian region of Ontario, where many live to this day. So yeah, that's basically a good rundown of Lenape history. Good rundown of Lenape history and everything, but now into the languages, because that's what we're here for, right? So the thing about the Lenape language is that it isn't actually one language, but rather two very closely related languages. They're called the Unami language and the Munsee language. The Munsee language was actually spoken more in the northern area of where the Lenape lived, whereas the Unami language is spoken more in the southern area. And these languages are very, very closely intertwined. They have a lot of the same grammar, relatively similar vocabulary and everything, but if you were to speak one to somebody who speaks the other, they wouldn't be able to understand you. And so for that reason, they're usually considered two completely separate languages. But because of this, there is a little bit of a distinction that is needed to be made. I'm going to be specifically talking about the Unami language instead of the Munsee language, just because I found more resources on it and was able to learn more about the Unami language than the Munsee language. But yeah, just a little bit of a disclaimer. But yeah, what's the modern day actual state of these state of the Unami language that is part of the Delaware sort of languages? And the answer is not good. Very, very not good. Because of a lot of these, because of all of the forced relocations that I mentioned earlier, which disrupted Lenape communities so much, just having to constantly move out and out and out and out and out. And add to that the fact that many Lenape ended up having to kind of assimilate into white American culture somewhat. Many Lenape learned English and taught their kids English, and as a result, a lot the Unami Lenape language wasn't really passed down a lot to the next generations. It definitely was by many Lenape, but over time, just the forces of assimilation and just having it be more practical, really, because everybody around you who's a white American spoke English, and so many Lenape just continued to kind of not use their native languages as much and use their native language as much and use English instead. And especially many people too, especially in the Oklahoma communities of Lenape, married outside of the Lenape community and into other communities, other cultural communities. And because of this, many children of these marriages also didn't really speak Lenape just because their parents, and just all of those sort of factors ended up kind of intertwining to just have Lenape, the Unami Lenape language, be in a really, really dire state. The language eventually got to be spoken by fewer and fewer and fewer people just because of all this assimilation, and over time it just got less and less and less and less and less until eventually the last speaker of the Unami Lenape language, Edward Thompson, died in 2001, and with him, he was the last fluent speaker of the Unami Lenape language, and so with him, the Unami Lenape language is, at the moment at least, considered dead. It isn't used anymore, which is just really, really sorrowful. It's really sad, because it is definitely a very fascinating, unique language. But the thing is, the awesome thing in all of this, despite all of this, all the very not nice parts, is that many Lenape are creating these programs and trying to get back their language, to have more people speak the Unami Lenape language, and to have it be more used by the Lenape community, by all the Lenape communities that do exist across across North America. Yeah, many Lenape are bringing these languages back, which is just so amazing. It's really cool. Especially all many Lenape communities across the board have tried language classes, like physically bringing people into classrooms and teaching them the Lenape language, which has had a moderate amount of success, which has still been really cool and everything. Some of these programs have had issues finding resources to teach the Unami and Lenape language, or that sort of thing. But it still has been taught, and so there are still a few, like, many semi-fluent speakers of the Lenape language. There have been other classes on the Lenape language. One very notable one in Western Pennsylvania was actually taught by a woman named Shelley DePaul, who ended up writing this entire Unami Lenape language textbook, which is like extremely rare for this language, just because it's been studied so little compared to a lot of other languages. And she ended up teaching a class out in Swarthmore College in Western Pennsylvania, I believe. And she also taught it to some people who were non-Lenape, and that has increased a lot of awareness out there, increased the amount of resources, and many of those students also wrote a bunch of things in Lenape, which has actually increased the amount of Lenape language resources that you can find online, which is just amazing. There were many other language classes that were taught by other Lenape before this, of course. A bunch of notable ones. Lucy Blalock ended up teaching many classes, and Nora Thompson Dean, a Lenape woman who lived, I believe, Bartlesville, Oklahoma. She was, ended up teaching many classes as well, which actually ended up increasing the amount of people who could speak the Lenape language, which is just amazing. It's just awesome. And another, more so related to preservation, but many Lenape communities especially have gotten outside linguists to kind of come in and help record their language and make resources on how to learn the Lenape language, so that eventually they can start teaching it more. Nora Thompson Dean, as I mentioned before, she was integral in helping to create these audio tapes and just recording the Lenape language for future generations. And the tribe that she was affiliated with actually created this Lenape Talking Dictionary using a lot of audio tapes that she recorded of herself and others, as well as an outside linguist. She was aided by an outside linguist named Jen Rementer, who ended up creating this entire Lenape language database that Lenape can actually use to go in and learn all of this. And so it's just all very awesome. Very just blown away by how much these people have worked to really help bring back their language. It hasn't necessarily come back fully yet, but a lot of progress has been made, and Lenape language is very fascinating, and definitely very different compared to my native language, which is English. For example, Lenape nouns are considered either inanimate or animate, like alive or not alive, compared on what they are. Kind of like how and they're kind of treated like how gender words are used in Romance languages, like masculine and feminine words in Romance languages. Lenape verbs are an entire different matter, extremely, extremely complicated. They actually conjugate for person, number, objects. They're how central to like the narrative of what you're saying a certain person is, whether that person or that thing is alive or not necessarily not alive, if they're near to the speaker or far to the speaker, and a lot of these other very, very specific, very, very different than English things that you would actually think that verbs could actually mean. It's all just very fascinating. Adjectives too are actually, the distinction between verb and adjective doesn't really exist in Lenape. It's actually much more, adjectives are kind of treated as verbs, which is definitely also another very interesting thing. And yeah, I actually wanted to show you some Lenape vocabulary. So, this is actually from the Lenape Talking Dictionary, which Nora Thompson Dean's Associated Tribe actually put together, which is just an amazing resource for all of this. And so, yeah, I just wanted to share with you a few words. So, yeah, if you'll come a little bit close, you can come a little bit close. So, yeah, first one, hi, written like this. And sounds like,
hey.
Yeah, pretty simple, right? Yeah, hey. Yeah. And then we also got, what's your name? Oh, oops. Quit. Which, yeah, I'll play it again just for you guys. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you were to be asked this, you would actually respond with dot dot dot. You would respond with, I'll play it again. Mm-hmm. And then if somebody were to ask you, how are you, you would have to ask and if you wanted to say, oh, hey, I'm good, I'm doing well, you would have to say So yeah, that's a little bit of vocabulary in Lenape, maybe enough to get you started, maybe enough to get you curious. And the real only thing I can say to just sort of wrap this up is that the Lenape language is fascinating. It's very, very interesting, and it's just very important to a lot of people, especially definitely important to many Lenape. And just I before researching the Lenape, I didn't even really know anything about the Lenape language or the Lenape in general, and it's just a whole different culture that you can learn about, and just kind of some things that you never would have thought were even really just the way that some people might think. And you go out and you just research and you figure out, whoa. And so, I don't know, from somebody who used to be kind of uninformed about the Lenape, to somebody who's kind of middle of the road informed about Lenape now, to you guys, I would just say, go out, learn about Lenape, look up the Lenape. Many Lenape tribes and communities actually have like public powwows where you can go and you can kind of respectfully look on and kind of just see them celebrate their culture and just gain more insight into it. And so the only real thing I can say is stay curious and try to learn more. And yeah, see you next time.